You ever notice how the more effort you put into her, the faster she pulls away? You text back quick. You plan something nice. You check in. You try to be a good man. Consistent, open, emotionally available. And what do you get in return? Silence, dry replies, flaky energy. She starts treating you like background noise in her own life. And the worst part? You weren't even trying to play games. You just liked her. That was it. You were being honest. You were present. You cared. But somewhere along the line, she stopped doing the little things. No more good mornings. No more spontaneous affection. And you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? Here's the thing no one prepares you for. In a world saturated with attention, consistency no longer feels like value. It feels like pressure, like weight, especially to someone who's used to being chased. We're living in a time where men are punished for being emotionally available and rewarded only when they become ghosts. It's insane. You show interest. They call it clingy. You wait a few hours to reply, and suddenly you're different. You prioritize your own time, and now she's intrigued. You detach, and now she's obsessed. How did it flip like this? When did being real become unattractive? And before you throw your phone across the room or spiral into some black hole of red pill advice, pause for a second, because this isn't about turning cold or being toxic or faking detachment. It's about understanding power. Not power over her, but power over yourself. See, there's a reason women chase the man who seems like he doesn't care. But it's not because women are cruel or because they want what they can't have. It's deeper than that. It has more to do with biology, psychology, and ironically, with something the Stoics talked about centuries ago. Because in every human being, man or woman, there's a deep attraction to centeredness, not aloofness, not arrogance, but stillness. The kind of stillness that says, I don't need you to make me feel like I'm enough. And when a woman senses that energy, when she can't move you emotionally with her absence, her games, her mood swings, it does something to her. Not in a manipulative way, in a primal way. It tells her, this man's world does not revolve around my presence, and that makes me want to earn a place in it. It's brutal, right? Because we grow up thinking vulnerability and honesty are always attractive, that if you just show her how much you care, she'll appreciate it. But in reality, if that care isn't coming from groundedness, it starts to feel like desperation. And that's where most men fall. Not because they're weak, but because they're taught that love means self-sacrifice. That desire means chasing. That attention means value. But here's the truth. When your sense of worth is tied to her replies, her availability, her mood, you've already given away your peace. And women can feel that. They might not say it. Hell, they might not even realize it. But emotionally, they start pulling back. Not because they don't like you, but because something in your energy says, I need you to choose me for me to feel okay. That's the shift. And it's that shift, the one you don't even notice you're making, that flips the whole dynamic. One day you're the mystery she's drawn to. The next, you're just another guy trying too hard. So what do? You stop chasing her. Not to hurt her. Not to prove something. Not to win the game. But because a man who truly values himself never needs to chase validation. He lets it come to him. Or not. And either way, he's whole. That's the core of Stoicism right there. You don't attach yourself to what's outside of your control, especially not someone else's feelings. You don't beg the world to love you. You become the kind of man the world can't help but respect. Not because you shouted your value, but because you embodied it. So now we ask the real question. Why does your attention, your affection, your effort sometimes repel the very person you want? And what would happen if you stopped trying to be chosen and chose yourself instead? Let's go deeper. Most men don't realize the trap until they're already in it. It doesn't start with begging. It doesn't start with chasing. It starts with moments so small, so subtle, you almost miss it. You feel ignored, and you take it personally. That's it. She took longer than usual to reply. She seemed colder. Something shifted, and instead of letting it pass, you react. Maybe you double text. Maybe you start wondering what you did wrong. Maybe you change your tone, warmer, softer, more available, just to make sure she still wants you. And just like that, the shift begins. You abandon your center without even knowing it. What drives that shift isn't neediness. It's fear. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being forgotten. The fear that maybe, just maybe, this connection you thought was real was never mutual to begin with. It hits deep, not just because it's about her, but because it's about you, about your worth, about your place in the world. See, most men were never taught to hold the line emotionally, to be okay without being chosen, to let silence be silence without attaching a meaning that breaks them. Instead, we're raised to perform, to please, to earn affection. We're trained subtly to equate love with validation and validation with availability. But here's what the Stoics understood long before modern psychology caught up. Whatever depends on another person's will is not yours to control, and thus not worthy of your peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." That doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop giving power to things outside your control. And yet, when it comes to women, most men abandon that principle. Why? Because at a core level, many men are looking for emotional permission to feel like they matter. They want someone else's affection to be the evidence that they're enough. But that's backwards. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Because when you do, you realize how much of your behavior was driven by the hope that someone else would finally give you permission to like yourself. And women feel this. They might not have read Jung or Aurelius, but emotionally, they know when you're orbiting around them instead of standing on your own feet. And as much as it sounds cruel, that kind of orbiting repels them. Not because they're heartless, but because attraction doesn't grow in dependency. Nietzsche had a brutal take on this. He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. But he who esteems himself lightly inspires no awe. Translation: if you undervalue yourself, even subtly, you become invisible. You don't command respect. You don't stir anything inside her. You just fade. And here's where the paradox deepens. The more emotionally reactive you are, the less magnetic you become. You'd think that expressing more would make her feel closer. That opening up quickly would show trust. That sharing your desires would invite reciprocity. But attraction doesn't work like that. What creates desire is an emotional flood. It's emotional depth held in containment. A man who's stoic, not robotic, but self-governed, is rare. And rarity always draws attention. Not because he withholds out of manipulation, but because he values his emotions enough not to spill them on anyone who hasn't earned access. This is the real reason why women chase the man who shows no interest. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't collapse into his caring. He feels everything, but he isn't ruled by any of it. He can look at her, admire her, enjoy her presence, but not need it to validate who he is. And in that restraint, in that calm self-possession, she feels something rare, a man who isn't trying to escape himself through her. That's what creates gravity. Now, let's talk about identity. Most men build theirs reactively. You think you're confident when she's warm. You think you're failing when she pulls away. You feel like a man when you're being desired, and like a ghost when you're ignored. But that's not identity. That's emotional outsourcing. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and father of logotherapy, said this: "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that moment where she doesn't reply or shows indifference, that's where your freedom lives. The freedom to not react, to not spiral, to not chase, to not question your worth just because she didn't mirror it back. You can feel the discomfort. You can want her. But you don't have a hand over your sense of self just because the emotional weather shifted. That's the Stoic edge. You don't close yourself off. You just stop handing out your piece like it's on clearance. Because here's the truth most won't say out loud. She doesn't lose interest when you stop showing emotion. She loses interest when you stop being anchored in yours. There's a difference. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep chasing validation in the name of vulnerability. So the question becomes, are you acting from grounded desire or from fear of being left behind? Are you holding the line because you know your worth or crossing it hoping she'll confirm it for you. Because one makes her respect you, the other makes her forget you. And when you really absorb that truth, it's not her attention you'll crave anymore. It's your own center. That's where we go next. It always starts the same way. You notice she's distant, so you lean in. She replies slower, so you try harder. You feel her energy shift, so you compensate, more messages, more compliments, more just checking in. And on the surface, it feels harmless. You're just showing care, right? But underneath that effort is something darker, something quieter, a slow erosion of your frame, a subtle transfer of power you don't even see happening. That's the part no one tells you about. The real damage isn't that she pulls away. It's that you start adjusting your behavior to win back what should have never been conditional in the first place. Respect. Little by little, your mindset changes. You stop saying what you want to say because you're scared it'll come off too strong. You delay your responses, not because you're busy, but because you read somewhere that it keeps her interested. You agree when you want to disagree. You apologize when you're not even sure what you did. You shrink so she'll stay. And it works for a while. You might get a reply. You might even get her attention back temporarily. But what you lose in the process is far more dangerous than her affection. You lose yourself. That's the unseen consequence. You don't just get ignored. You start living like someone who deserves to be ignored. And the worst part? You start believing it. You internalize the silence. You question your worth. You begin to operate from a place of scarcity, not strength. From reaction, not choice. And here's what the Stoics would say. That's the exact moment you've abandoned your nature. A man's nature is to be centered, to be ruled by reason, not impulse, to anchor himself in what he can control, and release everything else. But now your thoughts spin on a loop around her behavior, her moods, her texts, her attention. You're no longer living. You're monitoring. And every time you adjust your mood to match hers, you reinforce the belief that your state depends on something outside of you. That's slavery of the mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do. But what are you doing now? You're chasing ghosts. Ghosts of validation. Ghosts of connection. Ghosts of the version of her that showed interest in the beginning and disappeared without warning. That's how it messes with your psyche. Because now, every conversation isn't just a conversation. It's a test. Every silence is a threat. Every day without her affection feels like proof you're slipping. So what do? You overcompensate. You say yes when you should say no. You laugh when you should speak up. You give when you should wait. You become so emotionally available that your presence stops feeling valuable. And the irony? She doesn't even have to reject you. You're doing it for her, by prioritizing her over your peace, by adjusting yourself instead of confronting your standards, by making her behavior the measurement of your self-worth. That's how the trap tightens. And here's the Stoic warning most men ignore. The moment your happiness depends on someone else's attention, you've made them your master. That's not love. That's dependence. And what happens to dependent men? They become unstable. Not obviously, not dramatically, just gradually. You check your phone more often. You lose sleep. You lose focus. You say you're fine, but you're not fully here. A part of your mind is always wondering, why is she being like this? What can I do to fix it? And right there, without knowing it, you've handed her control of your emotional climate. That's not attraction. That's submission. And you can't submit and expect to be respected. Not because women don't value kindness or emotion, but because emotional leadership is rare. And if you're not leading yourself, you're following her feelings. And even she won't trust you in that position. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. But if your peace depends on a notification, you're not free. You're at the mercy of something fleeting, unstable, external. And if you stay in that place long enough, it reshapes everything about you. It changes how you walk into a room, how you interact with others, how you perceive your own value. Because when you believe your worth must be earned through effort and affection, you become addicted to proving it. That's why you stay in situations where you're undervalued. That's why you can't walk away from someone who's already emotionally gone. That's why you apologize when you haven't done anything wrong. Because deep down, you think your very existence needs permission. And here's the cruel truth. She senses all of it. She might not be able to explain why the spark is gone. She might still say she likes you. But emotionally, she's drifting. Because something in your energy says, I'm not enough unless you approve. And that energy doesn't attract. It repels. So what do? You stop. Not stop caring. Not stop loving. Not stop showing up. But stop bending. Stop twisting yourself to earn what should have been inspired by your presence, not your performance. You start protecting your frame the way you protect a sacred space. Because once your frame is gone, so is your gravity, the pull, the presence, the mystery, that thing she can't quite name, but always feels when you walk into a room grounded, composed, clear in your mission. You reclaim that, not with anger, not with manipulation, but with calm. That's what we build next. Not an ego, but a core. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, where something you just clicks. Not because you read a quote, not because someone gave you a strategy, but because you're tired. Tired of chasing, tired of waiting, tired of checking your phone like a prisoner, waiting for a call that proves he still matters. And in that quiet exhaustion, you start to see it clearly. You've been outsourcing your power to someone who never asked to hold it. That's where the rebellion begins. But this isn't a rebellion against her. It's not about cutting people off or pretending you don't care. It's a rebellion against your own patterns, against the way you conditioned yourself to need attention to feel whole. And the first step? Stop reacting. Start observing. You don't need to double text. You don't need to clarify your intentions. You don't need to prove you're not like the other guys. What you need is space, mental, emotional, spiritual. Step back and watch. Not with judgment, not with bitterness, with presence. What happens when you stop initiating? Does she reach out? What happens when you don't feel the silence? Does she lean in or vanish? That's your data, not her words, her behavior. Stoicism teaches us that the truth is not in what we're told. It's in what we witness. And often, what we witness when we stop overextending is brutal, but necessary. You might see the energy fade completely. You might realize she was never that invested to begin with. You might see that your presence was carrying 90% of the connection. Good, because clarity is better than comfort. And once you have clarity, you can do something most men never dare to do. Detach, not emotionally shut down. Detach. Detachment isn't indifference. It's the quiet knowing that your worth doesn't fluctuate based on her engagement, that your time, your energy, your love, all of it is currency, and you don't spend it where it's not valued. The man who masters detachment becomes magnetic, not because he plays games, but because he's not trying to win anything. He's already whole. Epictetus once said, "Don't seek for things to happen the way you want them to. Rather, wish that what happens happens the way it does, and you will be serene." That's the shift. You don't force energy. You don't resist outcomes. You simply respond with integrity. You feel the loss, you honor it. You feel disrespected, you set a boundary. You feel unseen, you don't beg, you move. That's the rebellion. But it's not all silence and boundaries. You also need to build something bigger than her. Because if you're honest, part of the reason you've been so fixated on this woman is because you've made her your mission, not intentionally, not out of weakness, just out of a lack of direction. You made her the source of your validation instead of your own growth. So now, you pivot, you build, you go back to the gym, not to get a six-pack for Instagram, but because your body is your temple and discipline is your language. You dive into your projects, not as a distraction, but because you were put here to create, not to chase. You reconnect with your friends, your purpose, your inner silence, not to make her jealous, but because life is bigger than any woman who can't see your value. That's not a flex. That's a return to form. You don't rebuild for revenge. You rebuild to remember who you are. Seneca said, We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And most of the pain you're feeling, it's not about her. It's about the stories you've told yourself. If she leaves, it means I'm not enough. If she doesn't respond, I must be doing something wrong. If I back off, she'll forget me. You want to break free? Burn those narratives. Because the moment you stop chasing is the moment you start radiating something different, something stronger, something unshakable. You walk into rooms differently. You speak slower. You listen more. You no longer look for signs. Because you are the sign. You don't need to prove you're valuable. You embody it. And suddenly, she notices. She doesn't say anything right away, but her energy shifts. She texts more often. She asks how you've been. She starts to feel that void you left when you stopped orbiting her life. And maybe, just maybe, she comes back. But here's the twist. You no longer need her to. Because something more valuable happened. You came back to you. You, the man who doesn't react to every emotional wave. You, the man who speaks when it matters and stays silent when it doesn't. You, the man who values his peace more than a momentary rush of attention. You, the man who walks away not out of ego, but out of clarity. That's the real rebellion. Not to be colder, not to be harder, but to be wiser. Because when you stop chasing, you don't become invisible. You become rare. And in a world addicted to instant gratification, the rare man, the man who doesn't need validation to breathe, becomes unforgettable. That's not Stoicism as a mindset. That's Stoicism as a way of life. You were never meant to beg. You were meant to build. So build. Here's what no one tells you. It was never about her. Not really. It wasn't about the timing or the text or the fact that she stopped calling you by that nickname. It wasn't about the dates that fizzled out or the silence that made your stomach drop. It was about what her presence meant to you, about the way her attention temporarily filled something inside you that you didn't even know was hollow, about the illusion that, through her eyes, you were finally worth something. That's the part that stings when she pulls away. Not the loss of her, but the loss of who you thought you were when she was looking at you. But here's the truth that breaks the illusion. If your value rises when she stays and crumbles when she leaves, it was never value. It was dependency dressed as affection. You wanted her to reflect back what you couldn't yet claim on your own, that you matter, that you're enough, that your presence is worthy of desire. But no woman, no person, can give you what you refuse to give yourself. And that's where most men miss it. They think if they just find the right one, all the pain, the doubt, the confusion will go away. But what they're really searching for is a shortcut to self-respect. And that shortcut doesn't exist. Because the truth is brutal and simple. You don't get the woman by needing her. You get the woman when you no longer need anything to prove who you are. That's the paradox of attraction and the core of Stoicism. Detachment isn't a trick to make her chase. It's the byproduct of a man who no longer needs to be chased to feel like a man. And it's rare because we're all raised on the myth of romantic salvation. Movies, music, culture, everything tells you that she is the prize. That if you just love hard enough, wait long enough, change yourself just enough, she'll finally pick you. But what if you were never meant to be picked? What if you were meant to become? To become the kind of man who doesn't flinch when he's overlooked, who doesn't fold when someone hesitates, who doesn't chase what retreats because he knows that what's a line won't run and what runs was never meant to stay. That's freedom. And when you step into that, something shifts, not just in her, but in the way the world responds to you. Your silence becomes powerful, not because it's cold, but because it's calm. Your absence becomes valuable, not because you're punishing, but because your time has weight. Your presence becomes addictive, not because you try to impress, but because you stop performing. You're no longer trying to win her over. You're trying to win yourself back. And here's the most powerful truth you'll ever absorb. The man who doesn't chase because he knows his worth isn't negotiable. He doesn't need to convince anyone. He is a conviction. And that kind of energy is unforgettable. So when she senses that, when she feels that you're not trying to hurt her anymore, she starts to shift. Not because you manipulated her, but because you stopped orbiting, and now she feels a pull of your gravity. But even if she doesn't come back, even if she forgets your name, your face, your laugh, you remember something far more important. You don't disappear when she does. You remain solid, calm, complete, because now when she ghosts you, it doesn't trigger panic. It reminds you to keep walking. When she's hot and cold, you don't respond with anxiety. You respond with boundaries. When she pulls away, you don't chase. You don't collapse. You don't shrink. You stay still, because that stillness is your power. She might come back. She might not. That's not your concern. Because now you're not operating from scarcity. You're operating from clarity. And clarity, unlike emotion, doesn't waver. You don't need her to choose you. You've already chosen yourself. And in doing that, you've done something most men never have the courage to do. You've stopped making love a transaction. You've stopped trading your self-worth for crumbs of attention. You've stopped measuring your masculinity by someone else's capacity to recognize it. You return to the one truth that every Stoic, every man of depth and presence, knows at his core. Your peace is not a reward. It's a responsibility. And from that peace, you don't beg. You don't explain. You don't chase. You simply live. And the world starts to orbit you. So what now? You keep walking. You keep building. You keep speaking less and doing more. You let silence speak for you. You let your energy filter people. You let time reveal who truly sees you and who only wanted your light when it burned too brightly for your own good. You become so grounded in your mission that no woman becomes your mission. And from that space of freedom, of presence, of wholeness, something beautiful happens. You stop chasing women who don't want you, and you start attracting women who respect you. Not because you followed a script, not because you played it cool, but because you became the kind of man who never has to. That's Stoicism. That's masculinity. That's freedom. And that's what she can't stop thinking about long after you've gone.